Okay, so today we are going to continue on with section 9.4. So yesterday we went through the notes for section 9.4, and today we're really just going to do some practice with that, with solving these equations by square roots. And I'll continue to show you some examples on the graph where you could see where those x-intercepts are the same thing as your solutions or your roots that you're finding using this method. So once again, we are going over how to solve quadratic equations using the square root method. And this method can really only be used when you have an ax squared plus c equation, meaning that the b value would be a 0, so that would cancel out. So the only variable you have is the x squared. And when that happens, you can just get it by itself and solve for it by square rooting to get your two solutions, or those two x-intercepts. So going through the different problems, our goal obviously is to get this x squared by itself using the same inverse operations that you would have used back in the beginning of Algebra 2, just solving a regular equation. So if I want to get my x squared by itself, I want to add that 29 over to the other side. So that leaves me with 4x squared equals 36. Then I would divide both sides by 4, giving me x squared equals 9. Now remember, at that point, you want to square root both sides, but when we're solving, every square root has two answers, a positive and a negative, so we're going to get two solutions there. Now, if we were to graph this, we would need to get it in this form here, where everything's on one side of the equation except for the y. So I would have to bring that 7 over, making it y equals 4x squared minus 36. And if I were to put that in my graphing calculator, 4x squared minus 36, and I were to graph it, you would see that the graph crosses through the x-axis at +3 and -3, making those your x-intercepts, and that's what you're solving for when you do these equations. Okay, so taking a look at number 2, again, we want to solve for that x squared there, so we're going to try to get it by itself. So we're adding the 50 to the other side, leaving us with 2x squared equals 98, dividing by 2, which gives us x squared equals 49. And then I'm going to square root that to get rid of that x squared and just make it a single x, and the square root of 49 would have two answers, positive and -7. All right, so moving on to the next problem. Again, there's only one variable here, just the x squared, so I can use this method. I'm going to go ahead and get that x squared by itself. So I'm going to add the 120 to the other side. So I have 5x squared equals 80. Divide by 5. So x squared equals 16. Then to get rid of my squared, I square root both sides, giving me x equals positive or -4. Okay, number 4. Again, there's only one variable here, so we can continue to use this method. So I'm going to add the 2. So that gives me 1/2 x squared equals 2. Now at this point, I would want to multiply both sides by 2 in order to get that x squared by itself. And 2 times 2 is 4. And then I would square root both sides, and I would get my two answers of positive and -2. Okay. And going to the next one. Okay, so next one, again, we only have the one variable, just the x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and get it by itself. So I'm going to move my 8 over by adding 8 to both sides. So that would give me 1/3 x squared equals 12. Then I'm going to multiply both sides by the 3. So I have x squared equals 36. And then I'm going to square root both of those to get my two solutions, which are positive and -7. 6. All right, and then number 6. Now this one's a decimal problem, but it doesn't make any difference because you only have the one variable to solve for as well. So we're adding the 6.4 over to the other side. 0.1x squared equals 6.4. Dividing by 0.1 will give me x squared equals 64. And then you're going to square root both of those, and you'll get your two solutions, which are positive and negative 8. Okay, so now we're going to move on. We're going to do a few more of these, but they will not work out evenly. So when you do them, you'll need your calculator, and then you will round your solutions to the nearest hundredth, which would be 2 decimal places. But the process is still the same. So again, we just have our one variable here, 4x squared minus 8. Equals 122. So I'm just going to get that x squared by itself. So 4x squared equals 130. Divide that by 4. We get x squared equals, let's see. I believe that is, let's see, 4 goes into, I think that is 35. Let me check that. 32.5, my bad. Okay, 32.5. So now we're going to square root the 32.5. So this is where our calculator is going to come in, right? So when you go to square root your 32.5, you're going to do the square root of 32.5. Now the calculator is always just going to give you the positive answer, so it's 5.7. But you're going to have to account for both the positive and the negative. You have to remember to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one. So again, just the one variable means we can continue using this method. So I'm going to add the 43. So 7x squared equals 77. We're dividing by 7. X squared equals 11. So now I'm going to square root the 11 to get my two solutions. So x equals positive or negative, and then I go to my calculator. I'm going to do the square root of 11. I'm going to round that to nearest hundredth, which would be 3.32. So my answers are positive and negative 3.32. All right, number 9. Okay, so again, I have just that one variable there. So I'm going to subtract 7. 2x squared equals negative 6. Divide by 2. X squared equals negative 3. Now, when you go to square root that, you're going to end up with no real solution. So remember, you cannot take the square root of a negative. So if you tried to do that and you did the square root of a negative, you'll get an error message on your calculator. This one says error non-real answers, which tells you there's no real solution. Your calculator may just say error or something like that, but that is why it's saying that. Now, again, if I were going to graph this and I had 2x squared plus 6, for example, if I moved my 1 over and did it that way, and I go to here on my calculator so you can see what that looks like on the graph, 2x squared plus 6, the reason why there is no solution is because that parabola will not cross through the x-axis. So if you have a graphing calculator, you can always check that to see if that's why you're getting that answer. Okay, so a couple more. All right, so number 10, we have the x squared, and we are going to get it by itself. So we're going to subtract the 23. So I have 3x squared equals, and this gives me 51. Dividing 51 by 3. So if you do 51 divided by 3, you get 17. And then you need to do the square root of 17. So x is going to equal positive or negative what do I get when I do my square root of 17? 4.12. So positive or negative 4.12. Okay, next one, again, we're just getting that x squared by itself. So I'm adding the 27 over to the other side. 6x squared equals 36. Divide by 6, x squared equals 6. And then I would want to do my square root of each side. X equals positive or negative. And then what is the square root of 6? So on my calculator, I'm going to do the square root of 6. 2 places would be 2.45. So that's my answer there. Okay, so now take a look at number 12, and we're going to do some problems that are a little bit different, where there's parentheses involved or different tricky things like that. So in this case, we still only have one variable, right? So we can still use this method, but we have to get that x by itself. Now the last problem is the x, there was no parentheses or anything, so we just moved things over by adding and subtracting and then dividing or multiplying. But now we have parentheses involved. Now you do not want to distribute here, because if you remember, when you have a parenthesis with a square on the outside, you would actually have to write the entire parenthesis twice and then FOIL. So you could do it that way, but it's a lot of work. You would have to write 5 times x minus 8 times x minus 8, FOIL them together, distribute the 5, then you're going to have to factor. There's ways you can do it. It's just going to be a lot more work. But since you only have the one variable there, you want to get it by itself. That's going to be your easiest way of doing this. Now, you want to just not distribute the 5. You want to divide the 5 here. So when you divide both sides by 5, you're now left with x minus 8 squared equals 3. Now, because you can't do anything with the x minus 8 because this is in parentheses and there's a square, you're going to square root that entire side of the problem. So when you square root the square, you're just left with x minus 8. And on this side, you're going to have plus or minus, and then your square root of 3, which equals 1.73. So now what happens is when we go to add 8 here, we're going to get two solutions that are different. We're going to get 1.73 plus 8, which is 9.73. And then we have to do negative 1.73 plus 8. So negative 1.73 plus 8 is actually 6.27. So you're still getting two answers, but they're two different answers, okay? So now just to kind of show you what this would look like if I was going to graph it. Well, if I was going to graph it, I'd have to move my 15 over. So I would have 5 times x minus 8 squared minus 15. So let's see what happens on a parabola for that, right? So I go to my y equals 5 parenthesis x minus 8 parentheses squared, and then we had minus 15, right? Now, if I graph that, look and see where it crosses through. It's crossing through at the 6.27 and then the 9.73. Okay, so you can get two different answers that don't have to always be positive and negative of the same thing. Okay, so that was the two different answers we got for number 12. So now when we move on to the back here, the rest of these problems, we're going to have more of these other situations. So it's good practice. Okay, so let's take a look at number 13. Again, you just have the one variable, but because it's inside the parentheses, we're going to get rid of the 4 first by dividing, not distributing. Unless you like doing extra work, do not do that. So we have x plus 9 squared equals 6. To do anything else here, you got to get rid of that exponent. So unless you want to FOIL something out, which is more work, you can do that, but I would just do the square root to get rid of it. That's going to be a little bit easier than doing all of that FOILing. Now, square root of 6, remember, there's two answers. That's the mistake people make. They forget the plus minus. So the square root of 6 is 2.45 if we're rounding to the nearest hundredth. So when you subtract your 9, you're going to have x equals positive 2.45 minus 9 and then negative 2.45 minus 9. So positive 2.45 minus 9 is one answer, and then negative 2.45 minus 9 is the second answer. So negative 6.55 and negative 11.45. Those are your two answers for that one. Okay, so moving along, 14 and 15, the same concept, but the number that's out front we have to get rid of is a fraction. So instead of dividing both sides by that number, we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal, which in this case would just be 2. So now I'm going to have x minus 4 squared on one side and 14 on the other. It's the same thing from here. So we're going to square root each side because I don't want to have to FOIL anything. So that leaves me with x minus 4 equals positive or negative, and then I'm going to do square root of 14 on my calculator. 3.74. So now I add the 4 to that, and I get my two answers because I'm going to do 3.74 plus 4, which is 7.74. Then I'm going to do negative 3.74 plus 4, and I'm going to get 0.26. And those are my two answers. Okay, so number 15. I want to multiply by 4/3 on both sides here to get rid of that fraction. So that will leave me with x plus 7 squared. And on this side, 9 times 4/3 works out to be 12. Now I'm going to square root both sides so I can get rid of those parentheses, and I just have x plus 7. And then the square root of 12, if I do that on my calculator, and round to the nearest hundredth, it's 3.46. Now I'm going to subtract 7. So x equals 3.46 minus 7, and then I have negative 3.46 minus 7. So I'm going to have negative 10.46. And then when I do the 3.46 minus 7, I get negative 3.54. So those are my two answers. Okay, so we'll just do a few more for practice. There's a couple other that are snuck in here that are a little bit different. So I'm trying to hit all the different types that you could come across. Okay, so number 16 is another one of these fraction ones. So you're going to multiply by the reciprocal, which would be 5/2. So then you're left with x minus 4 squared, and then 16 times 5/2 works out to be 40. Square root both sides. So you have x minus 4 equals positive or negative, and then on my calculator, I'm going to do the square root of 40, which is 6.32. So now I'm going to add 4 to that. So x equals, well, 6.32 plus 4 will be 10.32. And when I do negative 6.32 plus 4, I have negative 2.32. Okay. All right, now number 17 is a little different because you might be like, well, wait, we have two variables. We do, but they're the same, so they can be combined into one. So when that happens, you just want to get your like terms on the same side of the equation. So I'm going to subtract my 2x squared onto this side, and that will give me 5x squared. And then I'm going to add my 34 to the other side. So that will give me 5x squared equals 50. And then we're back to just a simple basic problem where we're going to get x squared by itself. So I'm going to divide by 5, which gives me x squared equals 10. Then I'm going to square root both sides. So x will equal positive and negative, and then the square root of 10 I'm going to do on my calculator. Round to the nearest hundredth, so 3.16. Okay, number 18 is very similar to the other ones we did on this page. It's just they put the parenthesis on the right-hand side of the equal instead of the left, but you don't do anything different. You still try to get that x squared by itself on the side that it's on. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So it gives me 8 equals x squared plus 7. Now we don't have to have the parentheses anymore, so we're going to just subtract the 7. 1 equals x squared, square root both sides, so your x equals both positive and negative 1. Okay, and then we have 3 more problems. So when you take a look at 19, we want to combine these somehow, but before we get into those parentheses, we're going to have to do something with this 4. So this is an example. Since there's no exponent outside the parentheses here, we can distribute this time because you're just distributing the 4. You don't have to FOIL anything. So this would be an example of where distributing would be effective. So we're going to get 12x squared minus 24. Once we do that, now we can combine these like terms. These are both x squared terms, so I'm going to put them together on the same side of the equal sign. So now I have 3 equals 3x squared minus 24. Now I would add my 24. So I have 27 equals 3x squared, divide by 3. X squared equals 9, and then of course square root that, and x equals positive or negative 3. Okay, so I know it can be a little confusing because you're like, well, how come we didn't just distribute before? Because before we had an exponent on the outside of the parentheses. That's when you don't want to distribute. If there's no exponent on the outside, then go ahead and distribute. So like for number 18, for example, you could have distributed if you wanted to there, because there was no exponent on the outside the parentheses. So if I did it with distributing, I would have had 3 equals 3x squared divided by 3, x squared equals 1. I would still got the same answer. So that one, it kind of didn't matter which way we did it. And then number 19, you could have done that also. You could have divided by 4, but then the reason I didn't do that is because 9 divided by 4 and 3 divided by 4 would have been fractions. That would have made it a little more confusing. So, all right, now number 20, this entire thing is in the parentheses. The whole thing's being raised to 2. So you want to get rid of that little 2 first. So the first thing you're going to do is square root. Once you're done with that, now you just have x minus 4 over 5. And on this side, you have positive or negative 6. Now, in order to get rid of this fraction here, if you multiply both sides by 5, that'll get rid of that. So you have x minus 4 equals, and then 6 times 5 is 30, and you just have positive or negative 30. So when you have multiplication, the sign doesn't change the answer. You just have a positive or negative 30. So then you would add the 4. This is when you get your 2 separate answers. So positive 30 plus 4 would be 34, and negative 30 plus 4 would be negative 26. And those would be your 2 answers there. And then finally, we have one more problem. Now notice this time our exponent is on the outside. So we want to get rid of that right away. So the first thing I'm going to do is square root. That gets rid of my parentheses and that little exponent on the outside. So now I have 16x squared minus 8 equals positive or negative 9, because the square root of 81 is 9. So now I'm going to add the 8. So this one's a little tricky, because now I have 16x squared equals 2 separate things, right? So 16x squared equals 9 plus 8, which is 17. Or 16x squared equals negative 9 plus 8, which is negative 1. So it's easier if you just write as 2 separate problems from there. So x squared equals 17 over 16. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. It's 1 point something. 1.0625. Then you will square root that and you will get your two answers there. So square root of 1.0625 is 1.03, so positive or negative 1.03. And then over here, you get x squared equals negative 1 divided by 16, which is 0.0625. But when you square root those, it's not going to matter because you're going to get no real solution on those. So really, the only answers you're worried about are these two here. All right, so the last two were a little bit of like challenge problems. So tomorrow I will do a quick review video. I will post that so you can kind of look at that. And then instead of having a homework assignment tomorrow, you will just have a short quiz to do on this solving by square root method. And then Friday will be just a flex day if anybody has any makeup work or anything like that. So don't forget to check into the meetup on Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. if you have any questions on this topic. So that would be today if you haven't had a chance, if you if you watched this before 10:30, obviously. But please make sure you check in and ask questions if you have them. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.